Now, former West Virginia basketball coach Darian DeVries is current Indiana head basketball coach. I'm going to tell you why that's great news for the Kansas Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to Everydayers catching each and every episode, including our bonus episodes like this one, free available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. The news of the day, Darian DeVries, he was at West Virginia. Now he is going to Indiana. We'll get into that news, why I think it is such a big deal for Kansas in a couple different avenues, and why it's good news for Kansas overall on today's episode of the show, including some possible transfer portal impact here in terms of DeVries with West Virginia and Indiana. It's possible interesting fits for KU to look into in the transfer portal. So let's start right here. The news of the day, Indiana has hired Darian DeVries away from West Virginia. It was the 1 year for DeVries at West Virginia. He came over from Drake before that. And West Virginia should have made the NCAA tournament this year. They did have some injuries that kind of prevented the performance from maybe winning more games that would have, seeded them higher in the end, but they still should have made it with the 19 wins. They had a win at Allen Fieldhouse, and we saw what type of coach Darian DeVries was. Like, he did an excellent job against KU, especially in that first half that built up that big lead and eventually led to them, winning the game at the very end. And so, from an immediate standpoint, like, West Virginia is somebody Kansas plays, whether it's once or twice per season. West Virginia is a school that when they are going right, when they have the right team and the right coach, we saw it with Bob Huggins, they become one of the top contenders in the Big 12. And that was the case for some of those years against Kansas. So, like, that has a real impact on its own. And it also has an impact because there's a chance this is the lone coaching hire besides Alex Jensen to Utah, because it seems like Colorado staying with Tad Boyle, and seems like Bobby Hurley staying at Arizona State. Like, this could be the one possible opening. So what is West Virginia going to do? Where does it go from here? But I think beyond that, I think this could have a real impact on the transfer portal for KU. So I want to touch on that here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. And our episode of the show is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting with them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. They have cost-effective growth, which means instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business efficiently. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com, UPWORK.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business at Upwork.com. Continuing on with this bonus episode of Locked On Jayhawks. So, obviously, this will have impact on KU with Darian DeVries leaving. And what if West Virginia gets an even better coach, right? DeVries is a good coach, but what if they hit an even bigger home run? What if they don't? You know what I mean? What if they fall flat on their face there and it ends up being an easier game for KU, right? But I think the transfer portal is the biggest immediate one, especially in an offseason for KU where you're bringing in Darren Peterson. You're going to be losing a lot of players, whether it's seniors graduating like KJ Hunter, DeJuan Harris, right? Shaquille Moore, or players who could possibly be transferring out of the program, which we wait and see who it is. But certainly you could probably think of a couple names that would be interested in transferring from KU, and we'll see how that all goes. Point being, there's going to be a lot of roster spots to fill. And could Kansas bring in, maybe some diamond in the rough freshman recruits at this point late in the game? Yeah, of course. But they're going to have to fill the rest of the roster with some transfers, even if it is something where, you don't want the roster to be built totally on transfers, as we've kind of seen this past couple of years where Bill Self does well with the people returning in the program. So you look at leaving West Virginia with DeVries. Obviously, there's a chance that some of the players leave with him from West Virginia to Indiana. But what if they use this as an opportunity to kind of test the market, see what's out there, and maybe KU has some interest? There's already one guy who's in the transfer portal right now. That's Jonathan Powell. He is a 6'6" wing, basically a shooter. 8.3 points per game, 3.1 rebounds. No other stat above 0.7. He's under 38% on field goal percentage this year. It's just because all his shots are threes. Good three-point shooter, though, 35.2% on 5.7 attempts. So good volume overall. And he is about 43% on corner threes. So again, good shooter. He is somebody that I'm circling a little bit because it's like a worse version of when you brought in Rylan Griffin. Not quite as good as he was coming when Rylan was coming out of Alabama. But let's say you do lose Rylan Griffin to the transfer portal at the end of the season if he's unhappy with how things went. At that point, do you think about bringing on a guy like this to give you that shooter? On the flip side, it doesn't seem to work with these players with Bill Self. I don't think he wants one-dimensional shooters, so maybe you don't want to kick the tires on that, but certainly at least an interesting name there. Maybe the big name that's available for West Virginia. Unfortunately, Javon Small, not available. Unfortunately, the big man who went off for like 15 points now in Fieldhouse, he's a senior, just like Small, graduating. But Amani Hansberry, he did not play in the game in Lawrence. He was injured, but he's an interesting player. 6'8", 240 pounds, averaged 9.8 points, 6.5 rebounds this season, to go with 1.4 assists per game. He started his career at Illinois, then went to West Virginia this past season, and then, again, like maybe he's not going to transfer. I'm just keeping an eye on it in case he does. But can shoot the three a little bit, only 29%, but 3.9 attempts per game. That tells me he has a lot of confidence in the shot, and maybe with another offseason, you get that up to 33%. Not that I'm saying that's the focal point of the offense, but as I'm looking at big men for KU to add, I'm looking at a couple things. One, could you be a reliable backup and be happy in that role behind Flory Badunga? Two, could you be a big man that maybe you can play backup five, but you can also play next to Flory? Because I do think Bill Self wants to play some two big basketball. And so Hansberry would give you the opportunity to have, two players who could crash the offensive glass with Flory and Hansberry. If it's a thicker center matchup at 240 pounds, maybe he takes him and Flory works the outside, right? You can kind of invert that on the offensive and defensive end. And he at least has shown the ability to, take those attempts from the outside that you can make that work maybe a little bit with Flory. So he becomes an interesting name to me if he does enter post this Darian DeVries news. The other one is this would not be one that I would be interested in just because I don't think it's one thing if you have four shooters or four players who can shoot and then one player who can't, I think it's fine. Flory Badunga is that player for Kansas. I'm not saying the four players around Flory have to be great shooters, but you probably need at least two of them to be good shooters and one of them to at least be an average shooter, if not, one to be a great shooter, one to be a good shooter, and one to be an above average shooter, and then another to just to be a shooter in some form or fashion. So it becomes difficult to bring in a non-shooter. Sincere Harris is a 6'4" guard who 11% from three. That's a no thank you for me, but he's an excellent defender, and I could see Bill Self liking that. So I don't know, kind of interesting there. But maybe the bigger names are from Indiana, because now that Darian DeVries goes to Indiana, do some of these players test? Well, we already saw, I think it was Gabe Cupps this morning, who was like former four-star crew. He hasn't really done much at Indiana yet. The bigger name that happened, I don't know, maybe an hour ago or something, Malik Reneau, 6'9", 232 pounds. He's a 4/5 man for Indiana. Now, they've been playing some two big basketball with Reneau more at the 4, and that hasn't always worked for Indiana. They've been a little bit too clunky. So if you're Kansas, is it smart to bring in a guy that maybe, the idea there is, hey, he should be playing the 5 more than the 4, and say, no, we're going to bring him in to play the 4. I don't know. But there is a world that you could work it where you bring in Malik Reneau, and if Flory Badunga is giving you 24 minutes per game, 25 minutes per game at the center position, right? Let's say that Bryson Tiller gives you some minutes there. Let's say you could give Malik Reneau 8 minutes as the backup 5, and you give him another, 17 minutes as the 4-man next to Flory, or next to, when you're playing Bryson Tiller at the 5, to where he can shoot it a little bit. And maybe you can make that work, because Reneau is an excellent player, 55% from the floor, 73 at the foul line, 13.3 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game. Season before, 15.4 points per game and 6 rebounds per game. He's a very interesting player. Now, again, I would prefer the money go to a big wing who can shoot to play the 4. I would prefer the money to go to like a really good, guard who can create his own shot and score. But this would at least be an interesting name to keep an eye on. And it also is interesting because it's kind of like, okay, if he goes somewhere else, what if they use their NIL big money on that player, and that allows you to get somebody else, right? Then you look at another one, Miles Rice. If you are looking for more of the guard, here is what piques my interest. Again, this player has not entered the transfer portal, but this is just me thinking out loud that, with a coaching change, a lot of times that happens, right? And so Miles Rice was at Washington State for, it was a couple seasons. He had one season where he was out with injury. And he comes back and leads Washington State to an NCAA tournament win last season, 14.8 points per game. This season at Indiana, it wasn't a great fit because he's not a great three-point shooter. He's better from the mid-range. And because they're playing two bigs and there's not a ton of spacing, it becomes more difficult for him. Still put up 10.1 points per game, 2.8 assists per game, 1 steal per game. So, like, he was still doing – it's not like it was just a disaster, right? 41% from the floor, 32.5% from three, 82 at the foul line, right? So, modest numbers, but one that if I think you have the better pieces around him works well. I don't think they had the right pieces around him. That would be one that I would be very interested in because he can play on ball, he can play off ball a little bit, and I think that would work kind of really nicely with Darren Peterson. Now, I don't know where things are going to go. I don't even know if he's going to enter the portal. I don't know what other options are going to enter the portal at that point where, things would fall in the pecking order if he did, but it is at least an interesting name. And then the last one here, well, dare I say Mackenzie Mbako. I mean, after that whole kerfuffle, that's not the right word. After that whole thing happened with Kansas, I think they feel too betrayed to go into it. But, if you're talking about somebody who could play at the 4 position next to Flory Badunga, he averaged 12.2 points per game on 33% from 3 on 4.5 attempts per game, 44% from the field, 6'9", give you size. He can play the 4. But no, I don't think that would happen. But the other one to keep an eye on is Bryson Tucker. So he was a former top 30 recruit in the country, and Kansas was in on him to some degree. He ended up picking Indiana, and as a freshman, modest season, 5.4 points, 2.9 rebounds per game. The shooting efficiency wasn't really there, but top 30 recruits who were 6'7" wings who could play the 3 or the 4, developing in year 2. That sounds like a risk I'd be willing to take if I was Kansas. So again, he's not in the portal either, but if he enters, if Miles Rice enters, I'd be very interested. With Malik Reneau, I'm kind of hesitant. I'm open to it a little bit. At the same point, not really. Again, same kind of goes for Imani Hansberry, but those are the immediate ones. What else? What other impact could this have on KU down the road now that Tucker DeVries is at Indiana? This episode of the show is brought to you by Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. And the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by Nissan. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upset. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Florida Gators. The Gators, led by Walter Clayton, 17 points a game, just dominated the SEC tournament, winning each game by at least 9 points. Not only did Florida grab the 4th 1 seed, but they are the nation's most efficient offense. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Gators have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of the Nissan outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Finishing things up on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks with other impact for Darian DeVries. I mean, the other impact is just the fact that he went into Allen Fieldhouse and beat Kansas. As great as Bob Huggins was and had teams that got very close to winning Allen Fieldhouse and were contending, they never did that. And yes, it's a little bit different. The different factor is this Kansas team is worse than the ones that Bob Huggins was having to play against. I feel pretty good that, if you were to put like prime Javon Carter team, they probably win the game in Allen Fieldhouse this year too. But, point being, he's a good coach and you get one out. The thing is now it's the risk of, could they bring in a better one? Could they bring in just as good of a coach, or could it be a worse one? Because it is a really strong program when they get going. We've seen that. We've seen the ability there. At the same point in time, this is a program that's going to be on its 4th coach in 3 years. So how does that rockiness, how does that affect things? The transfer portal can go both ways. That uncertainty, that all those quick changes can certainly have a negative impact on that can lead to a quick downhill kind of snowball momentum-y type of thing. But because of the transfer portal, you could bring in the right hire at any time and he hits a home run right away and you're back to contending in year 1. So it would be interesting, and I'll be interested to see who that next head coach gets the calling. And then you got to think too, like there's going to be more ripples to this, right? Whatever coach takes the West Virginia job, now the previous school he was at is hiring somebody else, right? And eventually it's going to lead to more transfer portal players entering. Again, some of them just follow their coach, but Yeah, I mean, there could be more portal options that come out of this from whoever the next head coach is, and more movement across college basketball. But that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast. Don't forget to check out some of our recent content talking KU against Arkansas in the NCAA tournament. We're going to have more tomorrow on what player matchups are going to decide the first round matchup between the Jayhawks and the Hogs. We'll see you next time with Locked On Jayhawks.